What's up, beautiful people? What's up? Good evening. I am going to actually place a timestamp for all of you catching this replay in the description so you can skip the theme song in the beginning. Thanks all who are joining me live, who jammed out to that while you waited for me to get the final preparations for this stream ready. I hope you are all well. You know what to do, everyone. This is another live stream here on the channel. Thanks for joining me, Dhaiphong. Be sure to hit the like button. We have about 191 likes, 283 viewers. Let's hit that like button. Let's get 200 plus. Let's roll deep on this Saturday evening. We have a full schedule for you. Give me a good sound check, okay? Give me a good sound check. Let me know where you all are tuning in from. And I'm just going to run down what we're going to discuss tonight. So first on the agenda, of course, is the main event, right? We have U.S. officials openly discussing, not all in agreement, but openly discussing the destruction of TSMC, the major semiconductor corporation based in Taiwan, openly discussing this. We're going to get into who said it, why it's said, why this is happening, and we're going to go over an incredible Washington Post op-ed, which really does tell you where the neocons are at on this issue, and it's not good. It's not good for Taiwan. It is not good for the world. Then we're going to get into a bit of good news. I'm going to cover China's winning diplomacy, and we're going to listen to Scott Ritter's take. He had a good 2-minute take on this, and I'm going to break down exactly what's transpired over the past several months, which has really catapulted China into a leadership role diplomatically. And then finally, we're going to talk about the collective West's declaration of war against Brics, the alliance, the bloc of countries that is currently charting a course for de-dollarization, that's currently charting a course of independent economic development for the global south, led by China, led by Russia, but including Brazil, India, and South Africa, which has garnered a lot of attention of late. We're going to focus a lot on South Africa. And also, we're going to talk about the expansion that's to come, plus the announcement of possibly a currency that Brics is going to roll out and talk about and debate during its August summit. So that's all on the agenda. And of course, there'll be hopefully plenty of time to just hang out. But let's get right to it, okay? Let's get right to it. So you know what to do. Hit the like button. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notifications bell. Be sure to share the stream if you can. That helps get more viewers here live. And of course, I need to just let you know I'm still doing an equipment drive. You might notice these are new headphones. These were a gift. I'm still purchasing new equipment. The biggest purchase is yet to come, updating the computer device. So please do subscribe to my Patreon at patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. That's patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. For as little as $5 per month or $57 per year, you can help me make these upgrades without the financial stress involved with this inflation crisis, etc. So that is very helpful. There's also other links in the description. There's Substack. You can go to my link tree for one-time options. So all of those are in the description of this stream, of this video. All right, let's get right to it, everyone, because we got a lot to cover. All right, and we're going to spend a good night, a Saturday night. We're going to party this Saturday night, all right? So let's get to it, all right? Let's get to it. Okay. So TSMC. We're talking about Taiwan. So the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation is really a crown jewel in the region, in the Asia Pacific. Taiwan is where it's located. And of course, as you all know, Taiwan has become subject of the US and the collective West's war on China. It's proxy war on China. It's developing Cold War 2.0. And the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation is essentially an important target in the sense that Taiwan produces most of the world's semiconductors, and Taiwan is part of China as part of the One China principle. And so the United States has been doing everything it can to militarize Taiwan, sending heavy weaponry, sending military grade weaponry in the billions upon billions over this administration alone. But this is a development, this is a pattern that spans back all the way to the Taiwan Straits crises of the 1950s. So the United States has made a concerted effort to escalate the situation with China by militarizing Taiwan. And there has been a fast-track $500 million package where Biden used the same executive authority that he's been using for Ukraine. And so many people make the comparison that Taiwan is China's Ukraine in the sense that the United States and the collective West are seeking to use Taiwan as a chip, no pun intended, to escalate and eventually begin a hot war with China. And you remember probably on this channel me covering the Air Force Commander Mike Minahan's leaked memo saying prepare for war with Taiwan by 2025. I've talked about Taiwan authorities speaking about a potential US-China war in 2027 over Taiwan. There's been over and over again these indications that the United States is preparing for war and preparing for war with China on this Taiwan question. And so we've had many escalations of this. August 2022, Nancy Pelosi visiting Taiwan, meeting with Tsai Ing-wen, and essentially ripping up to shreds the One China principle. Then you also had Tsai Ing-wen visit the United States and meet with Kevin McCarthy in Los Angeles. I believe that was after a quick stop to New York, where she was met by protests. In November 2022, before that, after in between the Pelosi and McCarthy incident, you had local elections in Taiwan, which essentially were a referendum on the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, which is now a minority party in local authorities across the island. And 2024 is an election year, just like it is in the United States. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this mainly autonomous, but not independent government in Taiwan. It's autonomous in the sense that it is effectively a one China, two systems principle that is employed. But it'll be very interesting to see whether the current political status quo on the island now remains the same. But nonetheless, Taiwan, of course, in the mainland of China are hubs for this growing tech war that the United States and the collective West have been waging. Sanctions have been expanded. The United States has a blacklist on several companies, several Chinese tech companies, and the Biden administration escalated this. So that could be dated back to the Trump era. But during the Biden administration, not only did he increase that blacklist, but he has also instituted an export ban and has tried to enforce an export ban on Chinese semiconductor technology, meaning that countries like South Korea or whoever it is who wants to trade with China around semiconductor technology are not supposed to do it. And that's what the United States has been enforcing for quite some time under the Biden administration. Now there's talks that the United States during the G7 summit, which is coming up in about a week, they want to now, get this, the Biden administration now not only wants to strangle Europe and strangle the rest of the world by trying to cut off Chinese exports, but they want to now do investment curbs. So Biden is going to propose investment curbs on China, specifically around high tech, specifically around tech, because this tech war is very, very real. And so TSMC, you might remember Garland Nixon, friend of the show, his famous tweet now that went all around Taiwan in the mainland. He was being satirical, talking about how Nord Stream, the Nord Stream terrorist attack, the blowing up of Nord Stream, which was done by the United States, is only the beginning as the U.S. starts to plan its plot of destruction for Taiwan. And we've talked about on this show, both together and separately, Garland and I, this idea that the United States would target TSMC. And again, this is kind of in jest, but when you think about Taiwan, when you think about how a war might be waged around it, right? How the United States sends warships, militarizing, sending troops, sending weapons to the island. When you think about what would happen during a hot conflict with China, you have to understand that TSMC is going to be right in the thick of it because the United States sees TSMC as a potential problem, not as an asset. They're trying, the United States is trying so hard to wrestle away, right, the semiconductor industry from China. The problem is that most trade between Taiwan's semiconductor industry around the world actually happens through the mainland. Most trade that Taiwan does, the mainland is so critical. You can't separate the two, no matter how much the collective West, the United States at the lead, tries to do so. So we've talked about, well, TSMC is a target just like Nord Stream was a target. If the United States, with the direction of the CIA, the direction of Norway, and all of these other clients that the United States has used in its proxy war with Russia to blow up Nord Stream, who's to say that TSMC is safe? That this semiconductor corporation, which is so critical not just to Taiwan's economic life, but also to the world, because semiconductors are perhaps the most valuable technology that we have today, powering our computers, our phones, our cameras. So many things are powered by semiconductor technology. It's only to say that TSMC is a target. Well, we might have been talking about it in jest or theoretically, but it seems like that the United States is actually planning to destroy TSMC just to wage war against China. And I'm going to show you why. So Seth Moulton, he's a Democrat. He's a neocon. Seth Moulton is on the Chinese Communist Party House Committee. Seth Moulton was at I believe it's called the Milken Institute, another one of these think tanks. He was speaking with Michelle Flournoy. If you remember Michelle Flournoy, she was in the running for the Defense Department Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense position for the Defense Department. She was passed up for Lloyd Austin, former Raytheon board member, because she had too much baggage. She had history going back to the Clinton years of being a hawkish humanitarian interventionist, and she ended up being legitimately a liability for the Biden campaign. So what happened was he chose someone else. And I'm going to pull up now. Let's see where it is. Here we go. I'm going to blow up now the video. It's a TikTok video. So let me just expand it so you all can see. Let me see. I'll do this format. And here's Seth Moulton. Here's what he had to say about war with China and how TSMC is a legitimate target. Here we go.
Just making it very clear to the Chinese that if you invade Taiwan, we're going to blow up TSMC. I just throw that out not because that's necessarily the best strategy, but because it's an example
No. If you do that, you have a $2 trillion economic impact on the global economy within the first year, and you'd put manufacturing around the world at a standstill. I mean, this is a terrible idea.
So that's Michelle Flournoy. Michelle Flournoy has never seen a war she doesn't like. All right. Michelle Flournoy was big in the Libya debacle. Michelle Flournoy was big in the Syria debacle. She's a staunch advocate. I'm talking about a staunch advocate, a neocon hawk for what's happening with Ukraine. She is now the top, she's now at the top of the Center for New American Security, which is one of the most hawkish think tanks right now in the world, funded by the military-industrial complex. She is not for peace, yet she is telling Seth Moulton here, you got to listen to this again. This is incredible because she is telling Seth Moulton, this is a terrible idea. You're going to destroy the world economy. I mean, forget people, forget China, forget Taiwan, forget the people, because she's not concerned about that. She's concerned about the economy, and rightfully so. And she absolutely publicly rejects what he has to say. But the fact that Seth Moulton is saying it means that this is being discussed legitimately.
Making it very clear to the Chinese that if you invade Taiwan, we're going to blow up TSMC.
We should make it very clear to the Chinese that if they invade Taiwan, we will blow up TSMC. First of all, what kind of military strategy is that? It reminds me of Ukraine, right? Just, blow up Nord Stream because who cares about what happens to Europe? Well, obviously, the United States doesn't care what happens to Taiwan either. The United States obviously doesn't care what happens to any country that happens to be in the middle of its wars. The United States only cares about waging war with China. And so this tech war, despite the fact that blowing up TSMC would not just escalate a tech war, it would destroy the high-tech industry worldwide, because TSMC is actually that important. It's one of the reasons why China is trying to become independent completely, because of the export bans, because of the sanctions, all of it, but also because when war actually happens, China is going to need the United States is not going to hit China mainland. It will not, because China has the military capabilities. China has the only thing that could happen is a nuclear confrontation where the United States is shooting at the Chinese mainland. And no other way. There's not going to be troop invasion, none of that. That's not going to happen. So China understands this, and China's saying, well, we're trying to become independent because these sanctions, they're trying to squeeze us. But also, look, TSMC obviously doesn't have a future if the United States has anything to say about it. So listen to the rest of this, and then we'll move on.
I just throw that out not because that's necessarily the best strategy, but because
I just throw that out because it's not the best strategy. It's not the best strategy, right? No. I'm not saying this because it's the best strategy. I'm saying it because we've got to look tough on China. We've got to bully China. We also have to show China, and this is what everyone in the collective West, in the United States in particular, is saying at the top. These neocon hawks, they're all saying this. We need to say, and you're going to see the Washington Post say this, we need to show China just how aggressive we are. That is what Seth Moulton is saying here, and he's backed up by powerful forces within the establishment.
this is an example
No. If you do that,
No, little man. No. I'm Michelle Flournoy. I am a former Undersecretary of Defense, right? That she served that under Obama. I am the head of Center for New American Security. I actually work for the military industrial complex, and we kind of write your policies. No. Here's what she has
you
to say.
have a $2 trillion economic impact on the global economy within the first
$2 trillion. That's what Seth Moulton and these neocons want to blow up. $2 trillion.
first year, and you'd put manufacturing around the world at a standstill. I mean,
Yes, there would be an economic collapse, because without the semiconductor technology that TSMC is producing, you're not going to have any of the supply chains operating and working around basically all essential technology.
this is a terrible idea.
So there you have a war hawk telling Seth Moulton just how idiotic he is. And the fact of the matter is, though, is it doesn't matter how idiotic he is, because this is a real conversation that's happening. That doesn't come out of nowhere. That's not coming out of nowhere. That is a conversation that's been had within the Chinese Communist Party House Committee, that's being had among top brass within U.S. Congress, definitely within the Biden administration. If the Biden administration is willing to blow up Nord Stream to get at Russia, to try to strangle Russia, but also strangle the European Union, who's to say that TSMC, in order to strangle China, to strangle Asia, that the United States wouldn't do it? So this is a very serious development, a very serious development. And I want to I want to now show you. So that was I want to show you a report on this, okay? I want to show you a report on this because it gives some important context, all right? So this is from the Eurasian Times, which is an Indian publication. U.S. threatens to blow up Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing firm if China invades the island Taipei. Unhappy. So this is going to talk about the response. So U.S. Congressman Seth Moulton suggested that the U.S. should warn China by threatening to target Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing corporation if China were to attack the island. So during a conference at the Milken Institute, a California-based think tank, one of these slush funds for billionaires and millionaires, U.S. Congressman Seth Moulton was asked about the potential deterrent impact of U.S. chip policy on China. And he said explicitly that the U.S. should warn China that it would destroy TSMC if China were to invade. We should make it very clear to the Chinese that if you invade Taiwan, we're going to blow up TSMC. And then, of course, I talked about how Flournoy was very opposed to that. So in response to a query from the media before a legislative yuan session on May 8th, Chu Kuo-cheng was asked to share his thoughts on Seth Moulton's statement. So this is the response from Taiwan's government, okay? This is the response from their government because they're not happy, and you won't believe what they say, okay? Because this is hilarious. So Chu Kuo-cheng, okay, he is a representative, okay? He's a retired he's a Taiwan politician. He's part of the status quo right now. He used to serve in the Ministry of Defense, okay? So that's who he is. And he was asked about this issue. And this is what he had to say. He reiterated that Taiwan's armed forces safeguard the nation's, its citizens, resources, materials, and strategic assets. He emphasized that the armed forces would not tolerate any attempt to destroy such facilities, whether intentional or not. So I just want to emphasize what that really means. It means that Taiwan, these officials who are being, mind you, these officials in Taiwan, the DPP, they are being pushed into a war, and they are championing it themselves. They are puppets of the United States. They're championing a war with China, and now they're being forced to say that they will defend their TSMC from the United States, not from China, whether intentional or not. That is a direct nod to Nord Stream because there's been all sorts of conversations about Nord Stream. Was it intentional? Was it not? Who did it? And then, of course, Seymour Hersh blew the lid off of it. But now you have Taiwan authorities talking about intentional or not, we're going to defend Taiwan and TSMC from the United States. This means that this is a serious concern, not just a joke, not just a Freudian slip. Now, this is a serious concern. So escalating tensions in the Taiwan Strait have sparked concerns about a Chinese annexation of the island. The situation intensified further during large-scale military drills conducted by Beijing in response to Nancy Pelosi's visit, as I said. So, again, this is not a pro-China media article, obviously. They're talking about annexation. That's not even on the table. Reunification is on the table, and China wants to reunify based on a 5,000-year history with Taiwan that was broken up by colonization and then U.S. meddling. So the United States has been increasingly concerned about China's potential attempts to acquire Taiwan's vital chip technology. Well, Taiwan is part of China. The Taiwan authorities do major business with China. More than half of Taiwan's trade is to the mainland. It only makes sense. And China and Taiwan are actually very complementary in that what Taiwan produces regarding semiconductors, China does a lot of the manufacturing output afterward. So what TSMC does cannot actually happen without the mainland. So there have been suggestions by some former U.S. officials to take extreme measures, such as warning China that TSMC facilities would be destroyed if the island were occupied, as a means of deterrence and preventing China from acquiring Taiwan's crucial chip production plants. Taiwan officials have been dismissive of such ideas, and currently there are no plans to consider such tactics. Well, no, why would Taiwan authorities who are already having trouble, why would the DPP, already having trouble with local elections, admit that they're trying to blow up their own manufacturing hub, essentially its entire economy. If TSMC were taken out, Taiwan would not even have an economy. So, for example, Taiwan's securities chief allayed these concerns by assuring that Taiwan's semiconductor industry, which serves as a flagship sector, would not be targeted for destruction in the event of an invasion by China. So, several countries have actively courted the TSMC to expand its operations within their countries. TSMC has made significant investments amounting to billions of dollars in establishing a chip fabrication plant in Arizona. According to the U.S. National Security Council, the potential loss of Taiwan's Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation in the event of a Chinese invasion is estimated to have an impact exceeding $1 trillion. So experts point out that TSMC represents a complete ecosystem that is highly unlikely to be relocated. Even if Beijing were to occupy TSMC, it would be virtually impossible for them to maintain the chip production capabilities of the country. So there you have it. I mean, you have this obsession with, so you have Chen Mengtong here, the Taiwan's National Security Council, highlighting if in the event that a Dutch multinational providing key supplies to the Taiwan firm is unable to sell its lithography systems to TSMC, there's nothing TSMC can do. So they're talking about some of the vulnerabilities, okay? But the point here is that there's an obsession with, is China going to invade? Is it going to occupy? But the problem here is that it's the United States talking about blowing up TSMC as if it were Nord Stream. And I want to show you just how serious this really is, because, well, you have Seth Moulton saying this. Sure, it's not just Seth Moulton. It's not just Seth Moulton. It's the Washington Post publishing opinion articles, basically giving justification and apologia to what Seth Moulton said. And if you know anything about, let me just scroll down so everyone can see. If you know anything about the Washington Post, you know that it is owned essentially by the CIA, by Amazon, and then has a major contract with the Central Intelligence Agency. It is essentially one of the few paper of records in the United States overall in terms of private media, corporate media, but it is one of the most hawkish neocon outlets in the United States and in the world. So this is what they had to say directly after Seth Moulton said this: blow up the microchips. What a Taiwan spat says about U.S. strategy. So here we go. This is going to get real ugly, so buckle up. Deterring Chinese military aggression against Taiwan, a self-governed island. So they always say this, self-governed, right? It's self-governed. Taiwan is self-governed. Taiwan, yes, has an autonomous government in that it has the ability to govern affairs on Taiwan, but it does not have the authority that a nation has to essentially write its own constitution that would dictate nation state status, and it doesn't have UN recognition. So while it is self-governed, they love to say that to emphasize that, oh, maybe it could be a country. No, it couldn't be a country because it doesn't have recognition. The United States, the EU, the United Nations, no one recognizes Taiwan as an independent country. The reality is that the Republic of China, which is the governing body of Taiwan, believes itself to be the government of all of China, but it just is not. It isn't. There's no recognition of it as such, and it hasn't been that way for more than 50 years. So war games envision a naval and air campaign led by U.S. forces in Japan to defeat a Chinese assault. But if that fails, what other tricks might the United States have up its sleeve? So, I mean, this is the beginning of the article. They're already talking about, well, we can do that military thing, but we might fail. So what else can we do, right? If we can't do war games, if we can't strike China the way we want, well, look at what Seth Moulton had to say. One of the Democratic Party's leading voices on defense, a member of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, mentioned one possible option. What if Washington emphasized that a Chinese takeover would lead to the destruction of Taiwan's world-class microchip industry, specifically its flagship firm, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation? China might be less likely to spill blood and treasure, Moulton suggested, to capture a broken economy and shattered technological base. So there you have it. You had, not too long ago, our favorite Secretary of Treasury, right? You had Biden Secretary Janet Yellen. She has said straight up that national security concerns with regard to China, with regard to Russia, take priority over economic concerns. So she has said that. She has said that when it comes to the blowback on sanctions. And this is just another iteration of this, that no, we will blow up that corporation even if it hurts the overall economy, a la Nord Stream. Anybody? Nord Stream didn't benefit the world economy. No, Europe has been devastated by what happened to Nord Stream, the US destruction of Nord Stream. So, speaking at the Milken Institute, Moulton said further, one of the interesting ideas that's been floated out there for deterrence is just making it very clear that to China, if you invade Taiwan, we're going to blow up TSMC. I don't throw the, he said, I showed you, it's not a good idea necessarily. And then, of course, Flournoy basically said, shh, don't talk, little man. So on Monday, Taiwan's defense minister Chiu Ko-chang was asked about Moulton's remarks. He shot back with a warning. The defense minister said that the armed forces are responsible for defending Taiwan and its people, materials, and strategic resources. If they want to bomb this or that, the armed forces will not tolerate that kind of situation. So basically saying we'll defend ourselves from the United States. This spat is clarifying, says Jason Willick. This is Jason Willick, who is a neocon in his own right. As China's threatening activities have increased over the past decade, Washington ties to Taipei have steadily tightened, but that doesn't mean Taiwan's interests and America's will always be identical. One reason, so they're already saying this, get this, they're already telling us that Taiwan's interests are not the U.S.'s interests. That's how you know the United States is a absolutely rabid, warmongering state. It is a neocon. It is a psychotic neocon state. Does not care about anyone else's interests but its own. One reason is the U.S. is invested in Taiwan's security, in addition to the island's crucial geographic position and free political system, is its mastery of semiconductor manufacturing. So that's one of the reasons that it's invested in Taiwan. As a historian from Tufts University, Chris Miller showed in a 2022 book, Chip War, Taiwan's 20th century leaders intentionally built a microtechnology industry tightly integrated with the U.S. market, in part to increase the island's strategic value to Washington. As Americans grew skeptical of military commitments in Asia amid the Vietnam War, Miller writes, Taiwan desperately needed to diversify its connections with the U.S. The island's technological savvy also makes unification more desirable to Beijing. And if Taiwan were about to fall under Chinese Communist Party control, of course, it would be in the U.S.'s interest to minimize China's technological economic windfall. That might not entail blowing up TSMC, but many of Taiwan's semiconductor corporations presumably contain equipment with sensitive applications that could be sabotaged, disabled, or whisked away. So, again, I've got to be clear here. Even if the idea is not to blow it up, this author in the Washington Post is directly following up Seth Moulton, promoting the idea, speaking for the neocons. What he is saying is that, okay, well, yeah, we might not blow up the corporation, but we will make sure that it's under our control. We will steal it, we will control it, or we will essentially sabotage it so China can't benefit from it. Essentially, this tech war is about war. It's not about economics. If this were about economics, the United States would be not trying to sabotage or destroy these crown jewels in Asia. It would be trying to do business fairly. It would be trying to compete with China around business that TSMC does, but it cannot do that. So it only has the war option. So Biden has been excoriated for leaving $7 billion in military equipment in Afghanistan as that country fell to the Taliban in 2021. It's hard to imagine that a White House on the cusp of losing Taiwan wouldn't think about how to ensure dual-use technology worth far more doesn't fall into the hands of a great power rival. This might devastate the global economy, but China's subordination of Taiwan would have catastrophic economic consequences on its own. So, again, they're saying that even though the global economy would be ruined by destroying TSMC, well, there's this threat that China is going to take it over. China has no interest in taking over TSMC. China has for years, decades since reform and opening up, done robust economic partnerships and cooperation with Taiwan, so much so that Taiwan's companies thrive in the Chinese mainland, that Taiwan needs mainland investment. It needs to invest in the mainland to essentially have whatever economy it has now, which is now at risk from the United States. So China doesn't want to take over anything. It's doing just fine doing business with Taiwan's corporations. So some tension this continues between Washington and Taipei on the subject, at least behind the scenes, might be helpful. The U.S. has less ability to deter China from invading or blockading Taiwan if the island doesn't prepare urgently for its own defense. Ukraine's experience under Russian attack has shown that once an ally holds off an invasion, the U.S. is more likely to come to its aid. Yet Taiwan's military response to the threat from China has been slow. Its low defense spending relatively to countries such as Israel is often explained by Taiwan's voters' expectations of U.S. protection. Others might calculate that the stakes of China's threats are not as high as the U.S. says, that their lives might be able to continue mostly as normal even if Beijing did alter the cross-straits status quo. This is absolutely just mind-boggling. This is just how utterly brain rot the neocon foreign policy establishment is. This is how brain dead, the brain rot is so real. First of all, Taiwan's not a country. So why would Taiwan spend more than Israel, a heavily militarized nation state that was created by the collective West to be essentially a military outpost of the West in the Middle East? That's what Israel is all about. That's what Zionism was all about, the empowerment of it. Why would it have the same security concerns? Literally, Israel is surrounded by Arab countries occupying Palestine. It has a lot of defense concerns because it's an occupying force. Taiwan is not an occupying force. Taiwan is an island that legally belongs to China, and the island of Taiwan and mainland China have thousands of years of history where there's been no conflict. It's only been up until recently, Japanese colonization, 19th century. Then you had the U.S. meddling after the revolution, after 1949. All of this is to say that Taiwan is not this is all just complaining that there needs to be more militarization of Taiwan and perhaps threatening to blow up TSMC or to sabotage it or to, maneuver economically to weaken Taiwan might influence its authorities to speed up the process of war. That's how much the United States is willing to bully even its so-called staunchest allies, which the DPP, the current leadership in Taiwan, is, worse than a vassal, right? Worse than a vassal in the sense that they literally kiss the ring, even if stuff like this happens. But now they're going a bit too far. So I'm going to continue. Not if the island's leading industry were destroyed in the process. Moulton's suggestion might not just make China think twice. It could pressure Taiwan's political leaders to beef up the island's defenses. So there's almost like this military psychology going on. If we threaten Taiwan indirectly, if we say, well, we'll blow up TSMC because of China, well, maybe Taiwan will beef up its security so that it can prepare itself for a war that we want to wage on China. That's the logic here. Liberal internationalists, I don't want to use that word, I'm going to say interventionists, sometimes imagine the United States makes military commitments around the world for ideological reasons, or that its priorities and those of the world's democracies are inseparable. But military commitments are unlikely to endure under pressure unless they serve U.S. strategic and economic interests. There you go. Ding, 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 ding. Admission. Military commitments are unlikely to endure under pressure unless they serve U.S. strategic and economic interests. So that's what that's what he's saying the neocons are trying to do. They're trying to make war with China over Taiwan about their economic in strategic interests. And so Washington and Taipei now share a vital interest in Taiwan's independence, but the two governments are still seeking a strategy that can deter a rising China without provoking military assault. Do you see that? But the two governments. So here you not only have him trying to say that Taiwan has an interest in independence, which it does not, because that's China's red line. And China has said how many times now that that's the red line for war. That just like Ukraine, the red line was, well, you're coming up to our borders, you're assaulting Donbass, you're killing Russians. Just like that was the red line. Ukraine was the red line for Russia. Taiwan independence is the red line for China. We will need more boundary pushing. So he's complaining that the deterrence of a rising China without a military assault is not enough. And so that's how you know both that this current strategy is failing, but also that Seth Moulton's comments about blowing up TSMC are seriously being thought about, because this article was in direct response. The neocons put this person out into the forefront to say, this is a great op-ed to promote the neocon line about this issue. We need to support what Moulton said. We cannot disregard it. But that won't be possible so long. So boundary pushing, thinking like Moulton's, we need more of that. We will need more of boundary pushing. Boundary pushing, that's a very interesting way of putting, we will need more provocative threats that would lead to World War III. That's what this person is saying. But that won't be possible as long as a polite foreign policy world understands geopolitics as a liberal humanitarian mission. The U.S. needs a clear vision of its own interests in the Taiwan Strait in order to successfully defend them. So this is Jason Willick, who's a regular Washington Post columnist, and he does foreign affairs. He's been in the Wall Street Journal, American Interest. He's a neocon. He's a neocon because he's defending Seth Moulton more than Seth Moulton defended Seth Moulton. So that's how you know that this push for war with China over Taiwan is very serious. That's how you know that this threat to blow up TSMC is very serious. And it's all part of this larger tech war on China, which is all about trying to contain China, trying to conduct regime change on China, and really building up toward a hot war with China. And so when I say that Seth Moulton, well, he immediately prefaced his comments with, well, that's probably not the best idea. Just know that that is being spoken about along every conversation that is happening about what to do about China, that the neocons are engaging in. They're engaging in these conversations every day, perhaps every day for several. Who knows? China is obviously at the top of the agenda, right? China's at the top of the agenda. That is the crown jewel of the U.S. foreign policy establishment. How do you get rid of China's rising influence around the world? And there are many ways to do that, and the U.S. is attempting to exercise all ways to do that. And the biggest and perhaps most lucrative sector where this war is occurring is in the tech sector, because high technology is something that the United States is falling just absolutely so far behind, right? The Australian Strategic Policy Institute, you might remember them from the Uyghur issue, right? And they actually talked about how China has surpassed the United States in most of the key industries, okay? So they have a critical technology tracker. I'm just going to show you this really quick, because part of the reason why there's so much aggression, and again, the ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, is literally funded by the military-industrial complex, the Australian Defense Department, and the U.S. Defense Department. And this technology tracker says that the problem here is that China's global lead now in high technology extends to 37 out of 44 technology that they're now tracking. And this includes fields spanning from defense, space, aeronautics, robotics, energy, environment, artificial intelligence, advanced quantum technology areas. So we're talking about China having a lead over the United States, right? A lead across the tech industry, the tech field. And that means that China is even more soundly and resolutely stable than the United States wants. The US wants to break China. It wants to weaken China, wants to contain China and overthrow the Chinese government. Well, you can't do that if China is leading in all these areas. So they talk about competition and we need jobs and all this stuff. But the politicians, these neocons at the head of the United States, they're not thinking about that. They're thinking about what Seth Moulton is thinking about. How do we sabotage the tech industry so that China not only weakens and slows down, but potentially is unable to defend itself in a war that we are preparing? That's the reality here. We have to understand that the neocons, the foreign policy establishment in the United States, leading the collective West down the drain of endless war, is not really interested in economics so much as it's interested in serving the elites, right? They're corporate elites, sure, but especially the military industrial complex. That's what a lot of this is about. And Taiwan's TSMC is getting caught up in a potential Nord Stream scenario, which would devastate not just the world economy, it would essentially destroy Taiwan, but it would send humanity back very, very far because any attack on TSMC, right, any sabotage of TSMC would also cross China's red line because that would essentially be a war provocation. And we know that the United States cannot stop talking about how to violate this red line. Literally, the article, Seth Moulton, they're all talking about it. Washington Post, the New York Times, the entire media talks about Taiwan independence, talks about how to make Taiwan independent. All of that meddling is coming up to that red line and starting to flirt with sticking your toes, sticking the US toes, these neocon toes over it. Once it goes over, there will be war, it will go nuclear, and that's it. That's as simple as it gets, right? So that's what we need to know. And that's why this is so important to understand that when Seth Moulton says this, just know that he means it because the people that control Seth Moulton, they mean it. They mean real business, the business of war, and they're trying to escalate and start it with China. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. That's the end of that story. All right. We have about 1,100 viewers. We have 643 likes. Let's hit that like button before we get to the next story. Okay. I'm going to start the next story very promptly, but hit that like button, hit that share button, subscribe to the channel if you're new here, hit that notifications bell. So hopefully you get notifications. YouTube isn't so great about that, but hit the notifications bell, of course. And I am investing in new technology to upgrade, to make this channel work more smoothly. I want to test some of this out because I got I'm getting little by little, especially the cheaper items. But and I'll show you later if you want to chill with me after the content. Subscribe on Patreon, $5 a month, $10 a month, gets you all sorts of great perks. There's yearly subscriptions there. You can suggest guests, you can suggest content, so much more. And of course, the link's in the description. Subscribe on Substack. You can do that paid or for free. If you prefer Substack paid, you can also become a YouTube member. I keep forgetting. Oh, Joe, who's a moderator here, please do gift subscriptions. You can do that by hitting that join button. And that's a great way of also supporting this channel. But nonetheless, there's so many options on the link tree in the description too for one-time options. So let's go on, okay? Let's move on. So I want to talk about another reason, all right? With the help of our friend of the show here, Scott Ritter, another reason that China is being assaulted in this way. So you have the neocons preparing for war with China, right? They are plotting it out. They're talking about the destruction of TSMC, and they're doing this as a G7 summit is coming up. And Biden is preparing to try to push investment curbs. And you have also the EU, and I'm going to show you what the EU has to say diplomatically, but you have the EU kind of circling the drain as well. They've done so on Russia, but they're circling the drain on investment with China. And this is big because The entirety of the Western world is heavily dependent on Chinese manufacturing. All of the world, right? China is the manufacturing center of the world. It is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, if not the fastest, at least consistently. And it is so valuable to the world economy, so integrated, that unlike other countries that the US targets, targeting China economically will lead to very rapid economic suicide. Look what just happened with Russia. And Russia by far is not as integrated economically, just because for so many reasons, but especially the post-Soviet just absolute thievery that happened by the collective West. But Russia is not as integrated, but even so, its energy sector, wheat, etc., is so valuable to the world economy that Europe is in tatters due to the sanctions that it is imposing on Russia. So that's how illogical all of this is. But I want to talk to you about another reason why China is being targeted. It is because of tech competition, yes, but I would say that minimizes a really important part of why China is being targeted. And I say this all the time, it's the threat of a good example. And there are many elements of this. It's not just poverty alleviation domestically, stability, no homelessness, very low crime rates. There's just a lot of happiness in China. Ipsos, the world's renowned survey company agency, they did happiness around the world, and China ranked number 1. So China is doing very well, right? And that's of 2022. China grew 4.5%, and it's going, in the first quarter of this year, and it's going to be the biggest world economy in the next 5 to 10 years in GDP terms, and it's already the biggest economy in purchasing power parity terms when you adjust for the differences in how the currencies purchase, the value of the currencies in relation to a basket of commodities. So China's doing quite well, and one of the things that really scares the United States about China is not just what it's doing internally, not just how it's handling its business, right? Because the US doesn't want to see, the collective West, they don't want to see poverty alleviation and stability. All of that doesn't lend itself to getting a few people as rich as possible, as fast as possible. It doesn't lend itself to, how can we divert people's attention onto endless war? They are really concerned about as well, and probably more importantly, is China's global role, China's ability to cooperate with other countries without strings attached, China's ability to lead initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, which essentially says to the global South and the global majority, you can trade with us, we will develop your infrastructure, and we will cooperate in win-win exchanges that will make you rich, make you prosper, XYZ country, Pakistan, Venezuela. It doesn't really matter where, because 140 countries are a party to the Belt and Road Initiative, but we will connect you to us and to the rest of the world. We will connect you all together so that trade connectivity is that much more efficient and effective. Because guess what? That helps me as China, that helps me as a manufacturing hub to be able to go by land and by sea to trade in this way. But also it'll help you because now your underdeveloped economies will have access to certain raw materials, commodities, etc., maybe even access to credit that you didn't have before. So that is what the United States is really concerned about, that because with the economic influence around the world, right? China is the number 1 trading partner of most countries in the world, right? Whether you're talking about Australia, one of China's chief antagonists, right? So Australia is perhaps even more anti-China than the United States, or whether you're talking about countries like Ukraine, for example. We're talking about countries all around the world. Russia, number 1 trading partner, the United States, right? Like number 1 trading partner is China. So with that power to be able to trade with countries and offer such lucrative and attractive arrangements, right? China will build infrastructure. They have this high technology, they have this manufacturing capacity. And if you want to invest there, it's quite cheap still, right? Despite the rising economic growth that's happening in China, it's still quite cheap to invest. And there are very favorable arrangements you can make with China and with the Chinese government, with Chinese banks, and you can make very favorable arrangements to do business. And that's why many U.S. corporations are still there doing business. That's why many European corporations are still there doing business, but on the condition that you don't meddle in the internal affairs of China. And that's been a condition since reform and opening up. Do not meddle in our internal affairs or there will be consequences. So China now has all of this influence and prestige around the world. It has been able to expand its economic influence, but at the same time, what is often left unsaid is that its political influence, its diplomatic influence is also on the rise. And so we've seen that in the way the Ukraine conflict has played out. We've seen that in its peace proposal, right? Its 12-point plan for peace in Ukraine that has garnered a lot of attention worldwide, including from Zelensky, including from Russia. You had the Xi and Putin meeting back in March of this year. You had China now sending an envoy to all these countries that are party to the conflict, seeking to work on peace. But also you had some incredible developments, right, in the G20, and incredible developments also happen at the ASEAN conference, the ASEAN conference, and also now in the Middle East, you have China brokering peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which has had this massive cascade effect on politics in the Middle East. You have Saudi Arabia and Iran normalizing. You have Turkey and Syria normalizing, Saudi Arabia and Syria normalizing, and now Syria is suddenly back in the Arab League. You have the Yemen war officially coming to an end, as well as the Syrian war coming to an end, because now it's back in the Arab League, and Saudi Arabia and all the Arab countries are now engaging with Syria as the rightful, the Syrian government as the rightful government of that country for the first time, really since 2011. So, in a word, Chinese diplomacy, by brokering that deal in Beijing, by Iranian officials, Saudi officials sitting down and saying, we're going to, as the two of the most powerful countries, if not the most powerful countries in the Middle East, in the Arab world, in the West Asian region, we are going to put aside our differences and we're going to do so with China. China did that. So China's diplomacy is a huge reason why the United States is so angry with China. And I want to play you now what Scott Ritter has to say about this. He had a 2-minute topic on this question of diplomacy. All right. And you'll hear his words and take heed of his words, because in this 2-minute topic, he does not hold back on why we should be supporting China's diplomatic efforts. Here we go.
Diplomacy. It's the name of a book written by Henry Kissinger, a very famous American diplomat, statesman, somebody who was around back when the United States was the dominant force in the world, where American diplomacy actually meant something. But today, there is no more Nixon goes to China. There isn't even Trump goes to North Korea. What we have is a United States that is floundering in the world, losing its position, declining as a power. A vacuum has been created, a vacuum in a world that's torn asunder by conflict, a world that's begging for diplomacy, and yet America's not there. Who has stepped in to fill the void? China, Russia. China went into the Middle East and helped bring peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia, something that this time last year was unimaginable. And with Russia taking the lead, Saudi Arabia is now making good with Syria, again, engendering peace in the Middle East, something no American president has either been able to achieve or, frankly speaking, sought to achieve in many, many decades. And now, with the Ukraine conflict, China is once again stepping in, not to, as they said, try to exploit a situation for their own national interests, but to bring about peace, to put hope on the table that there could be a life in Ukraine, in Russia, in Europe following this conflict. But this conflict has to end. This is a situation that screams for diplomacy, a situation that the United States in its past would have been able to step in and try and negotiate some sort of peaceful resolution. But the United States is not only a party to the current conflict in Russia, but it's the leading instigator. And therefore, it's up to China to fix the world's problems, to step into the void, to put diplomacy in action. Thank goodness for China. This has been my 2-minute topic. Remember, knowledge is power.
Okay, I don't know what happened there. There were some issues. I hope that you were able to hear it. There was some skipping. So people said they lost the last 10 seconds. So I can put it back up for the last 10 seconds, just so you all get the picture, okay? Let me do that. All right, let me do that. So 10 seconds about here.
To fix the world's problems, to step into the void, to put diplomacy in action. Thank goodness for China. This has been my 2-minute topic.
So that's about it. I mean, but what he says is so important, okay? What he says is so important because what he is saying is that the United States does not have any interest in diplomacy at all, that it's not in a position politically to achieve any kind of diplomatic resolution in all of the wars that it is starting. And yet it is China and Russia too, because I believe that the Saudi and Iran deal opened up the door for Russia to help broker what happened with Syria and Saudi Arabia. And now Turkey and Syria are also getting close to normalization. We're talking about a cascade effect that has been facilitated in large part by China. And these diplomatic moves are part and parcel of a broader problem that the United States is seeing, which is that China is actually attractive. China has the ability to leverage its economic influence to tell other countries, do you want to prosper or do you want to circle the drain, being led like a poodle by the United States? And I believe that both China and Russia have been having serious conversations with other countries like Saudi Arabia and have been very influential in convincing countries like Saudi Arabia to be more strategically independent. If you read Chinese media, especially the Global Times, which is a very important media outlet to read, because the Global Times, as people say, it's the tabloid of the Communist Party of China because it's affiliated with the People's Daily, supposedly. But the Global Times is the most colorful, I would say, English language media outlet that China produces for audiences that, you know, English speaking audiences in the West and elsewhere. And the Global Times regularly talks about whenever diplomatic arenas are being entered, whether it's the Middle East or Europe or anywhere else, always talk about, and this is a government line too, this is how the Chinese government thinks, they always talk about strategic autonomy, strategic independence. They're never going to argue you should stop talking to the United States, you should stop doing business with the United States, you should stop, you should only work with us. But what they will say often and always to European countries like France during Macron's visit, to the European Union overall, when the European Union starts to get a little bit testy and rowdy and wants to kind of mix it up with China, tries to be a bully, Jungle Joseph Borrell, right? Wants to talk big to China. What they'll always say is, do you want to be strategically autonomous and prosper, or do you want to circle the drain and walk like a poodle with the United States? They don't put it in those words, but that is my interpretation of what they're always saying. Do you want strategic autonomy, which is best for you, or do you want to follow the United States, which is not good for you? And so Chinese diplomacy essentially operates as such. It operates as, we can win together. We can do business together. We can economically grow together. Look at what we've done. And that's where the domestic situation is so tied to the foreign policy. It's that, look at what we've done. We were once the poorest country one of the poorest countries in the world pre-1949, and even much of 1949 to 1959, 60 plus, we're one of the poorest countries in the world all the way up until the 70s. Now we've lifted 850 plus million people out of extreme poverty. We've grown at 10% per year on average in some decades, and now we're still growing at somewhere between 4 to 10% every single year. Now we're leading in all these high-tech fields. We're integrating the world economy. We have these infrastructure initiatives that have the ability to integrate and raise the level of development for everyone. We can lead de-dollarization with you all, the global majority, through mechanisms like Brics. We got it going on. And so maybe we should all talk about how to have a favorable international situation for us to do this kind of business. And I believe that's why Saudi Arabia, that's why Iran, that's why Syria, that's why Turkey, that's why Russia, that's why a lot of countries look at China and say, well, no, we can definitely make compromises if it means we can follow along a successful path like China's. It'll be different in form, but we can look at that example as something to emulate in our own context so that it's a win-win. We get to remain legitimate. Saudi Arabia's government, for example, gets to go on. It gets to be just as it was. It just doesn't have to be just some lapdog of the United States. And that's the real big issue that the United States has with China's winning diplomacy. That's what I call it. It is winning diplomacy. And the United States, it's not just the United States that has this issue, because the US, right, as Scott Ritter said, they are not prepared nor willing to engage in true diplomacy around the world. They are ratcheting up conflict. You have heard probably over and over and over again from US officials, from Antony Blinken to Jake Sullivan, who was recently pounding his chest about China. You've heard from all of these forces about how this isn't the time for China's peace plan, right? They're all saying that it's not the time for peace, right? China may be proposing peace, but it's not. John Kirby, right? White House spokesperson, defense spokesperson. It's not the time for peace. It's the time to supply Ukraine with weapons and to get ready for a counteroffensive that who knows when it will happen. Doesn't matter. We just want to sell weapons, push weapons, escalate, grind down Ukraine's military, and sanction the world, and just really enforce full spectrum dominance, right? Flood the world with weapons and sanctions and watch it burn. That's what the United States is saying to the world. And China is saying the opposite. China is saying, well, we have weapons, and China definitely deals weapons. It has a military industry, but it's not a top priority. It makes up like a single-digit percentage amount of all weapon sales around the world. What China says is, well, okay, if you want some weapons, I guess we can supply those, but we really have the real goods. We have the technology to help you rapidly build major infrastructure development projects, which will jumpstart your industries, i.e., building most of Africa's electric grid, building internet systems, 5G, 4G technology in Bolivia and Saudi Arabia too, right? These are the goods, the real goods, right? The roads, the bridges, the high tech cooperation. That is the real goods. Iraq, right? They have a deal with Iraq to build 1,000 schools in Iraq, many of which were burned to the ground because of the US's bombing campaign during the 2003 to 11 formal invasion. And of course, the bombing continued after that. So China's got the goods, and China thus has the ability to say, let's trade. Let's also wage peace. Let's be at peace with each other. Let's not move toward war. But I want to show you the contrast here. So while China is engaging in this winning diplomacy, I want to show you what Europe is doing. Because Europe is right now engaged in a dangerous game. Not only is Europe destroying itself through its participation in the Ukraine conflict, cutting itself off from Russia, and essentially putting its economies, putting the EU's economies in free fall. Europe right now is actually engaging in what is another form of suicide, and that is, quote unquote, they first called it decoupling. Now they don't want to talk about decoupling because Europe is very scared about China, the consequences China will enact if they truly talk about decoupling. So then you had Annalena Baerbock say de-risking, right? And she said that right after all of these conversations were going on about investment curbs and all of that, and in the lead up to the G7, after the foreign ministers gathering of the G7. So Annalena Baerbock, the German foreign minister, said, yeah, maybe we should de-risk. In Qingdong, they were meeting, actually. Qingdong said right to Baerbock's face, that's a provocation. You might want to rethink that because it's not going to go well for you. And certainly we're going to have to take measures to protect ourselves from it. And now the EU is coming together again to deliberate about China. They're having, EU countries are meeting, their ministers, their defense ministers are meeting, their top diplomats are meeting about tweaking their China policy, and they keep using the word recalibrating. So they don't want to say decoupling because that means China might think, ooh, you don't want to economically trade anymore? Well, we're going to have to prepare for that. We're not going to let you do that without consequences. So they don't want China to think that. They don't want China to think that there's decoupling. But now they're saying recalibrate because of the risks involved with Chinese trade. And again, it's a big insult to China. China does not like this kind of talk. So the European Union's, this is Reuters, European Union's diplomatic service has set out plans to recalibrate the bloc's China policy, aiming to reduce the risk of economic dependency on Beijing while continuing to cooperate on global issue. Essentially what this means is that the European Union is going to commit more suicide against itself in the name of so-called diplomacy. This is the opposite of diplomacy. It is simply economic suicide. The European External Action Service presented the proposal in a 7-page document sent to EU governments ahead of a meeting of their foreign ministers in Stockholm on Friday. The document is the EU's latest attempt to strike a balance between the views of its 27 member countries in a desire to keep a distinctive EU approach to Beijing while also preserving a close partnership with the US, i.e., the US is telling us, Big Daddy is telling us, our owner is telling us, we have to be good poodles and we have to be harsher on China. In a letter accompanying the proposal, EU Foreign Policy Chief Jungle Josep Borrell said there were at least 3 reasons for recalibrating with China, quote unquote. He said these were the quote unquote degree to which China is changing with nationalism and ideology on the rise, the hardening of US-China competition affecting all policy areas, and the fact that China is a key player in regional and global issues. So there you have it. The US is right here. US-China competition. Why would the EU need to be concerned about that? Oh, well, because the United States is in the EU's ear saying, do what we say, or do you want another Nord Stream? The EU is literally hostage to the United States. That's not diplomacy. None of this is diplomacy. This is all warmongering, and that's all they know how to do. The proposal seen by Reuters says that cooperation, competition, and rivalry will continue to be at the center of EU's China policy, even if weighing between these different elements may vary according to China's behavior. It's obvious, it adds, that in recent years, the rivalry respect has become more important. However, we must continue to engage with China, first, because of its influence in the world. Second, because China is here to stay. Oh, well, so not only are you defeatist, not only do you bow to the United States, but you're also saying that you have no chance to do anything to China. So this is how unhinged these people are. So it says that the EU should not subscribe to a zero-sum game whereby there can only be one winner in a binary contest between the US and China. But in terms of how they can de-risk when it comes to economic dependency, the paper suggests screening investments more closely and more robust export controls. What that means is put your economies in danger, because the more you screen investments, the less investments are going to happen. You know what less investment happens to in economies? What happens to an economy when there's less investment? There's more trouble. So this is just how subservient they are to the United States. And they say they should diversify sources of supply in key sectors, in particular those crucial to our green and digital transition, such as semiconductors, 5G and telecom batteries, raw materials, and critical minerals. Well, poor EU is going to find that actually China is a dominant player in all of those industries. So it's going to be pretty hard to de-risk or lessen your dependency unless you're going to build it yourself. Do you see that happening in economies like Europe and the United States, which are fostering massive, not just inflation, but automation and privatization and austerity? No. What's happening in the EU and in the United States is the opposite of that. It is to undo, to destroy, to sell off, right? That is what the US is good at. That's what the EU is good at now. That's why you have horrible, horrible economic problems in each of these respective areas, in these regions, in the collective West orbit. But I want to show you again what Scott Ritter was saying about diplomacy. Europe and the United States just not doing it. They don't do it. They don't know how to do it. They never really did do it. But certainly in this moment, there is no Kissinger moment. There is no normalization moment with China. There is no opportunity for that. There isn't even a Donald Trump. You heard what Scott Ritter said. There isn't even a Donald Trump to the DPRK North Korea moment. And that's just how much the neocons now control the US government, how they control government policy, foreign policy in particular. So EU-China relations are to worsen unless China uses influence with Russia to end the Ukraine war, said Jungle Joseph Borrell. So in my opinion, Joseph Borrell calls himself a socialist, but in my opinion, all Joseph Borrell is a mouthpiece for the military-industrial complex and of Washington. And this is what he had to say to China. This is the opposite of diplomacy. He considers himself the top diplomat of all of the European Union. And this is what he had to say to China. It is absolutely insulting. It's condemnable. It is disgusting. But here's what he had to say. With the U.S. already tightening its noose around China over its potential help to Russia in the Ukraine war, the EU is cautioning Beijing that it must use its influence with Moscow to end the conflict, or else the already strained relations with the EU bloc will further deteriorate. Here's what Joseph Borrell had to say, Jungle Joseph. He said in a press conference in Sweden, life is complicated. If I don't like your behavior, you cannot expect to be good friends. It's as simple as that. So he's referring to China and Russia's relationship. So this comes as China's special representative on Eurasian affairs, Li Hui, is set to travel to Ukraine, Russia, and other European capitals next week to serve as an intermediary and try to resolve the conflict that has marred the Eastern European region for over a year now. So essentially, he is trying to undermine China's efforts here. That's what he's doing. And so he said, it's important that China understands that what is happening in Ukraine is an existential threat for us. So they're admitting that this conflict for the collective West is existential, that we must destroy Russia, essentially. And we expect that China will use its role and its responsibilities. If that is not the case, our relationship will not be so good. These are really strong words from Jungle Joseph here, right? Oh, man, we won't have a good relationship because you're not doing exactly what we say. Borrell further told the media that we had been asking China to get involved with Ukraine, and this phone call with Xi Jinping was the first small step. And this special envoy is another step towards China using its influence to stop the war. But he continues saying, we know China is really practicing pro-Russia neutrality. So this peace initiative is important for us because we cannot have a good relationship with China if China is clearly supporting Russia. So that is what Joseph Borrell had to say to China. He's basically saying, do what we say, not as we do. Do what we say. This has been the case since the beginning, right? This absolute nonsense that China is helping Russia in the Ukraine proxy war, when the reality is that the EU and the United States came together to to precipitate and spark the Ukraine proxy war. And that essentially led Russia to intervene. It was the US's coup. It was its militarization of Ukraine. It was crossing all the red lines. And of course, the utter and total destructive assault of the Donbass and Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine, which was the red line for Russia. And China has been accused all along about potentially sending weapons and using possible technology to help Russia. And all of this is just it is just the foil for what the US and the EU really want from China, which is to decouple from Russia. It doesn't want China and Russia to be so close. So it wants to isolate both of them. And this is just a failed strategy to try and achieve that objective. But that is not diplomacy. And that is not going to work. China is not going to allow itself to be bullied, just like Russia does not allow itself to be bullied. China is not going to allow it. So all of this is just hot air. It's hot air from Jungle Joseph, but it shows that this gardener, the European gardener, Joseph Borrell, that what he is really preaching is a vile, crass, European racist exceptionalism that says the EU can tell you what to do, China, despite the fact that we are the ones collapsing. We are the ones crumbling. Our economies are sinking because we are just following the US like good, well-trained poodles into our own abyss. We are sinking like Nord Stream sunk because we collaborated to destroy ourselves. But we're going to tell you, a stable, growing, increasingly influential country, what to do. We're going to tell you, a country that hasn't been at war in more than 40 years, while we have participated in all kinds of wars, dozens of wars over that period. We're going to tell you what it means to wage peace. That's not diplomacy. So again, Scott Ritter is 100% right. That the United States is not in a position, nor is the EU. But not only this, it's also that China's diplomatic influence, its influence around the world, is a huge reason as to why the United States wants to sink China, wants to do what it's doing here, using the EU to try to isolate China, sinking the EU further into its own abyss in order to get to China. And this is going to be increasingly a theme. We have the G7 summit coming up. I think it's in late May, May 19th, I believe it begins. And so that's just another opportunity for the United States to propose what it wants to propose, which is all countries that are party to the G7. And then, of course, it's going to propose it to the rest of the world. All countries need to reconsider their economic ties with China. And now it's a fool's game. It's a failure. It's not going to work. You're not going to get countries around the world, especially the global majority residing in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, to reconsider their economic ties with China for what? For Nord Stream, the Nord Stream pipeline terrorist attack, for sanctions. You already have staunch economic partners of the United States and overall strategic partners of the U.S. like Saudi Arabia saying, no, wagging the finger like the Dikembe Mutombo saying, no, you're not going to gain so much leverage that your economic sanctions on Russia are going to be implemented on us. We're going to protect ourselves. And look at this great friend to the east, geographically strategic, economically prosperous. Why wouldn't we do business with China? And look, China is not saying that our government needs to change, that our policies need to change, that our leaders need to change. Everyone was listening when Joe Biden screamed, right? He screamed at the beginning of the Ukraine conflict. What did he say? He said that Putin cannot remain in power. The whole world was watching when, beginning right after February 24th, 2022, when the US and the EU began sanction after sanction to the thousands on Russia, which essentially led to an even more intense inflation crisis and an economic crisis for many countries worldwide, especially in Europe. And everyone was watching, not just with the sanctions, but everyone was watching as the United States poured weapons, it continues to pour aid into Ukraine to not stop this disastrous conflict in Ukraine, but to escalate it further. Everyone's watching. And then the United States has the gall to lecture everyone else on this issue. So that's not diplomacy. And countries around the world don't want to hear it anymore because they don't have anything to offer anyway. The EU and the US don't have anything to offer. So whether it's not being able to or interested in diplomacy, or the fact that they have nothing to offer, the United States and the EU are saying one thing and one thing only: do what we say or else. They're trying to say that to China right now, and China, I mean, will continue to do what it's doing. It's not going to balk. It's not going to be intimidated by the United States. The same goes for Russia. Russia's not going to be intimidated. But now more and more countries are seeing that around the world and saying, well, we don't have to be intimidated either. And even though you've had valiant struggles, valiant resistance to this unipolar order from smaller countries, Venezuela being one, Iran, not really a small country, but relatively small compared to China. Even though you've had valiant resistance, Syria, etc., from these small countries, they've been more vulnerable to sanctions, right? They've been more vulnerable to, let's say, your assets being completely, entirely stolen. That's what also the world was watching when the US stole hundreds of billions of Russian assets. But these smaller countries are more vulnerable. Then they see a rising Russia and China, and they say, well, we should possibly be not just friends, but really good friends with these two countries, because that will help us survive the same onslaught that they're experiencing. And that is the basis of multipolarity. And it's the basis for why the United States continues in the EU as its poodle, as its lapdog, continues to spiral into this de-risking, decoupling, recalibrating with China. And it's because they're worried about Chinese diplomacy. And you know what? They really should be, because it spells the end of their reign of dominance. It really does. It's the end of their reign of dominance. And for that, we should all applaud and be very happy. But we should also know that a dying empire, just like a rabid animal, an animal dying of rabies, just like a rabid animal, a dying empire is one that will not go into the night quietly. So we have one more story to go. Ooh, it's getting late. Thanks for being with me this evening. Keep liking the stream. Oh, we have 931 likes and 1,100 viewers, so we only need a couple hundred more, but that's a great ratio to say the least. It's been great to be with all of you. Thank you so much for your contributions. I'm going to get to your super chats very soon. Thank you for your super chats, because I am investing in technology. This all helps. I need to upgrade my technology for the channel. So super chats, of course, help. But Patreon, becoming a member there, is the best place to support my work. Okay, you can support at patreon.com/DannyHaiphong. There are great annual memberships there. And also, you can subscribe annually on Substack. You can do one-time options, and link in the description. You can gift memberships and join the YouTube membership community. You can find all that stuff in the description of the video. All right, everybody, let's get to the last story. Wow, it looks like we're going past 11 tonight, everyone. We're going past 11 tonight, and we're going past 2 hours for wherever you are. So I want to talk to you about the collective West basically having declared war on Brics. So this is a theme here. And I want to say I had no Ukraine stories today, because the information about Ukraine, the conflict right now with this spring offensive potentially starting, explosions and Russian aircraft and all of that, not only is it not my expertise, but I just want to say that it's really hard to interpret the information right now. And with the Russian government in particular being very careful about what it says about what's been happening around Ukraine and around Lugansk and some of the areas where these plane crashes and helicopters and explosions and all this stuff is happening, I just didn't feel ready and prepared to talk about it. But there's plenty going on around the world surrounding the Ukraine conflict, which of course spells and points to very important developments. And this is one of them. So the collective West has essentially waged, or declared, I should say, a war on the Brics alliance. I want to repeat that. The collective West has declared war on Brics. And so Brics, of course, formed in 2008 or 9, I believe. It was first just Brazil, Russia, India, and China. South Africa joined in 2014. Now it's exploding in membership. And I'm going to show you first how it is exploding in membership. And this comes after the diplomatic just flurry of achievements led by China that have occurred, diplomatic victories that have occurred in, and this is from the Middle East Monitor. So we have more interest in BRICS. So you have many countries. BRICS is going to eventually become huge, right? You have Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Algeria, and Bahrain all seeking to join the bloc. You have 5 countries among 19 who are expressing interest in joining the BRICS group, said Bloomberg. And so South Africa's ambassador to the group, Anil Suklal, said that the emerging market bloc of Brazil, Russia, India, and China and South Africa would meet in Cape Town on the 2nd and 3rd of June to discuss its expansion. So this is before the summit in August, by the way. What will be discussed is the expansion of the BRICS group and the way this can be achieved. 13 countries have formally requested to join, while 6 others have informally requested. We receive these requests to join every day. Every day, you heard that. Every day, BRICS is getting requests to join. And this is among the 190 plus countries around the world. China launched discussions on expansion when it chaired BRICS group, the summit last year, as it attempts to build diplomatic influence to counter dominance of developed countries in the United Nations. The proposed expansion raised concerns among members that their influence may diminish, particularly China's close ally, if China's close allies were accepted. China's GDP is more than double the combined size of the other BRICS members, according to Bloomberg. So there you go. They're already trying to divide. I don't actually think that's very much a concern, although India may be concerned because they do have quite a staunch rivalry with China, unfortunately. But since its formation in 2006, the BRIC group has added only 1 new member, South Africa, in 2010. So I got my dates a little bit wrong there. Formed 2006, South Africa included in 2010. So in February, Suklal said that Saudi Arabia and Iran were among the countries that had formally requested to join. Other countries include Argentina, the UAE, Algeria, Egypt, Bahrain, and Indonesia. You have Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov previously saying that the BRICS group could adopt a unified currency. Serious, self-respecting countries are well aware of what's at stake, see the incompetence of the masters of the current international monetary and financial system, and want to create their own mechanisms to ensure sustainable development, which will be protected from outside diktats, he said in January. So that's last January. But we're going to continue with this theme of de-dollarization with BRICS because the collective West is very unhappy right now with South Africa, the, I guess you could say, newest member of the BRICS group, BRICS bloc, which joined in 2010. And the reason why they're unhappy is because they're doing what they did to China, right? They're doing what they've been doing to China. Are you sending weapons to Russia? That's what they're saying to South Africa now. So there's been a recent spat between South Africa and the United States. And it's because recently the U.S. ambassador to South Africa went to the media, Ruben Brigetti, and they said that they are convinced that Pretoria supplied Russia with arms and ammunition. That's what they're saying. And this is, in effect, I believe, a declaration of war on BRICS, because South Africa, in the summit that's coming up, and of course in this meeting in June, so there's 2 big BRICS meetings, South Africa is leading them. This is obviously an attempt to undermine the BRICS bloc by going after what I believe in the absolutely racist and addled and imperialistic minds of the U.S. and collective West foreign policy establishment. They believe that South Africa is the weakest link here, right? Because you have Russia, India, China, mega economies, can't really intimidate them to a degree like you can South Africa. And Brazil, of course, is also delicate because Latin America is supposed to be your front yard, as Biden called it, and backyard, as the Monroe Doctrine has historically called it. And so you need to have balanced ties with Brazil because it's very delicate if you decide to isolate Brazil, which is also on the agenda, I believe. But they're trying to go after what they believe is the quote unquote weakest link. And I think they're making a mistake here. So Washington's accusations, right? Because South Africa is responding to these claims of weapons deliveries to Russia. Washington's accusations are disappointing and undermining bilateral ties, said Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa. So I told you about what Brigetti said. And Brigetti was apparently referring to the Russian-flagged ship called Lady R. The vessel was docked at the naval base during this period, so this period of December 6th and 8th of 2022. And Brigetti said the arming of the Russians is extremely serious, and we do not consider this issue to be resolved, and we would like South Africa to start practicing its non-alignment policy. I mean, that is bullying. This is, again, the U.S. attempting to bully South Africa, and I believe it's because of Brics. And so the vessel was docked at the naval base during this period where it delivered and loaded unidentified cargo, triggering speculation and questions from South African politicians. The ship itself was sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury Office of Foreign Assets Control last May over alleged weapons shipments. In a statement on Thursday, Ramaphosa hit back, saying Brighetti's allegations undermine the spirit of cooperation and partnership between the two countries. The president went on to say that no evidence has been provided to support the claims as usual, that South Africa was sending arms to Russia, adding, however, that the government has ordered an independent inquiry into the matter. He noted that South Africa and U.S. officials had discussed the issue, agreeing that there will be an investigation which will be allowed to run its course and that U.S. intelligence services will provide whatever evidence in their possession. So this is where I think South Africa is making a mistake. I don't think you want U.S. intelligence services running around your country. But of course, this is the contradiction of post-apartheid South Africa. The United States supported apartheid. It essentially ran South Africa into the ground, supporting apartheid, into just absolute, like, all of these wars that were happening, not just internally with the Liberation War, but also with Angola and Mozambique, in Namibia and all of these countries. So unlike many other nations, South Africa, which has close historical ties with Moscow, has not imposed sanctions on Russia over the Ukraine conflict. Ramaphosa said in May 22 that sanctions only hurt bystander countries. In February, Pretoria held naval exercises with Russia and China off its coast, angering the U.S., which said at the time that the drills allowed Moscow to test its military capabilities and demonstrates that it still has international allies. So South Africa, here you go. The RT article there sums it up quite well. South Africa has not been towing the U.S. line against Russia. It has not sanctioned Russia, has not followed along with sanctions, and also participated in these military drills, which we will get to. But I want to first talk to you about what happened after that spat, after Ramaphosa, basically the president of South Africa, said, this is undermining relations, that Brigetti, this U.S. ambassador to South Africa, is saying these things and is lying through his teeth. This is what the U.S. envoy had to do. This is what Ruben Brigetti had to do. So he had to clarify his apology because typical neocon behavior, hawkish foreign policy establishment behavior is to never apologize for what you've done. So the United States has never formally apologized for nuking Japan. It never apologized for destroying Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and dozens of other countries via coups and sanctions and proxy wars and then outright utter military interventionism. Hasn't apologized for any of that. And of course, the U.S. envoy, the U.S. ambassador to South Africa, also did not really apologize, even though he was literally forced to apologize. So South Africa's head of public diplomacy, Clayson Monyela, has asked for clarification after comments by U.S. Ambassador Ruben Brigetti following his claims that Pretoria had shipped weapons to Russia. Brigetti was summoned to South Africa's Department of International Relations and Cooperation, DIRCO, on Friday to talk with Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor. During the dressing down, the U.S. official allegedly admitted that he crossed the line and apologized unreservedly, according to Monyela, who was also present for the discussion. But the envoy wrote after the meeting that he was happy to, quote unquote, correct any misimpressions left by my public remarks, end quote, and that he had reaffirmed his strong partnership between the two countries. The ambassador, however, did not mention any apology in his tweet, triggering a barrage of questions. So here he just says, I was grateful for the opportunity to speak with Foreign Minister Pandor this evening and correct any misimpressions left by my public remarks, and I reaffirmed our partnership with the two countries and our important agenda the president has given us. This is what Monyela had to say. You may want to clarify, we are happy with the apology you offered in the meeting, but the comments here suggest that more was expected from you, Monyela said in response to one of many users wondering what the ambassador's apology entailed exactly. Essentially, he didn't really give an apology. It was a non-apology. So Monyela added that Brigetti had committed to making the apology public, which he apparently tried to do in this tweet, but regretted his choice of language on the issue. Amid the diplomatic fallout, Antony Blinken, U.S. Secretary of State, also had a phone call with Foreign Minister Pandor of South Africa on Friday, in which he underscored the importance of U.S.-South Africa strategic partnership and reiterate cooperation on shared priorities, including health, trade, and energy, according to a brief readout. So Cyril Ramaphosa, the South African president, had a phone conversation with Vladimir Putin, where the leaders agreed to continue building mutually beneficial ties in different fields, according to the Kremlin. So there you have it. I mean, you have South Africa getting closer to Russia. You have Brigetti making these horrific comments and then not publicly apologizing, but apologizing in private and then not apologizing in public. I mean, this is the way that neocons behave. They are snakes. They are the definition of liars. And so South Africa had to deal with this as one of the ways that the United States and the collective West is declaring war on Brics by literally threatening South Africa with consequences because of its relations with Russia and relations, of course, in the broader Brics bloc. And so I'm not going to go too much into this, but Annalena Baerbock, the United States neocon foreign policy establishment puppet, perhaps the top puppet at this point, foreign minister of Germany, said she is concerned. So after all of this, after all of this, Annalena Baerbock says she's concerned with allegations that South Africa is arming Russia. Very seriously, she said she's taking it this Friday. I'm concerned that there have been these reports. She added that she was treating the allegations very seriously. If someone were to supply weapons to the aggressor, it would be the opposite of ending the war. So you have Annalena Baerbock just on cue, supporting these ridiculous and baseless U.S. allegations. But we have to go over the context because obviously the United States is not angry about these lies. These are just lies, right? There's no evidence of this. And if South Africa allows U.S. intelligence services to run around its countries investigating, they're likely to just run into more problems and not get any real information. Just look at how that Nord Stream investigation has gone. But South Africa has simply rejected the U.S. line on Ukraine and U.S. policy regarding Ukraine. But the real reason, that's one reason why South Africa has drawn the ire of the United States and the collective West. Another is because South Africa now is tasked with leading the Brics bloc. It is going to host the big summit in August. It is about to host the major diplomats and foreign ministers of the Brics countries. And they are really in the lead now of admitting. Remember when Saudi Arabia said they're interested in Brics? It was South Africa that was engaging. It was Ramaphosa. It was South African officials engaging with major leaders of Saudi Arabia talking about joining Brics. So South Africa has really taken a lead role in the Brics bloc, especially in this moment as Russia, China, and the other countries are dealing with their other priorities. This is what it means to kind of democratically govern a bloc like Brics. So first, we have to talk about how South Africa is going to lead the debate about this new currency, a common currency. And so Bloomberg had this to report, and this report is from just before these comments were made. South Africa urges careful debate on option of introducing Brics common currency, calls mount for alternatives to using the dollar for global trade. And so South Africa is leading this conversation. And I believe that this is the main reason why now South Africa is coming under fire. Suddenly, as South Africa prepares to gather with the other Brics countries and deliberate on de-dollarization and a new alternative currency, suddenly the United States is saying, wait, have you been arming Russia? I mean, this is how obvious the agenda is. This is how obvious the warmongering is. So the Brics group of nations will discuss the feasibility of introducing a common currency and shouldn't rush any decision, according to South Africa's foreign minister. U.S. interest rate hikes and geopolitical conflicts have pushed up the value of the American currency and all the commodities priced within it to the detriment of most emerging markets. That spurred calls for alternatives to using the greenback as the global trade currency. And one option that's been flighted is for the Brics bloc, which comprises Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, to adopt their own unit. The issue is likely to be on the agenda of the August 22nd summit of its leaders in Johannesburg. I don't like preempting Brics leaders' discussion, said Nalende Pandor, who's the foreign minister. It's a matter we must discuss and discuss properly. I don't think we can always assume the idea will work because economics is very difficult, and you have to regard it to all countries, especially in a situation of low growth when you are emerging from economic crises. And so BRICS nation and other countries are saying, according to Pandor, why can't we trade in our own currencies? Why are we committed to trading through the dollar? South Africa is internationally traded currency. However, we hold a lot of debt in dollars, so we have to approach this discussion responsibly. So they're not saying that de-dollarization is going to happen tomorrow, but they're saying, and Pandor is being very diplomatic here, but is saying it's important. You have to read between the lines. Of course, they're going to say, given the IMF debt and all of that, of course they're going to say, well, we have a lot of dollar debt. We can't just shirk our responsibilities. So they're not going to draw the ire of the international financial institutions. But she did say, why do we have to only trade in dollars? Why can't we have an independent currency? And that's what's going to be discussed. But we also have to understand that these naval drills, and I talked about them on this show, they happened. Russia, China, South Africa, they do this. They do this quite often. But they did this in February. They had 10 days of naval drills, February of this year, and they did it in the Indian Ocean, and it overlapped with the 1-year mark of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And so why they get together? So, they've been doing this every year. All the context you need to know here for these naval drills is that it is really part of this BRICS bloc cooperation, but it is also part of kind of a Russia, China, and Africa cooperation that has been burgeoning. And these naval drills have been going on for quite some time, many years, all right, since 2019, and they've been building it up. And so the Atlantic Council had something to say about it. This is NATO's think tank, the Atlantic Council. And here's what they had to say about the dangers of this. And this is why they're so mad. This is what the U.S. has been saying, and I'll show you. All right. So, they talk about all these things, but these are the most important takeaways from their response, how angry they are at South Africa. So these drills signal that South Africa is not concerned with Ukraine and not interested in towing the Western line. South Africa would prefer to highlight its independence and willingness to conduct its international relations as it sees fit. So that's a big problem for them. That's a big problem. And so there's more here, though. There's more. All right. And let's see. So here, Sarah Daly. So these are all Atlantic Council think tank writers. Okay. Russia's recent diplomatic and military push in South Africa signals that it can continue foreign relations as a bilateral security partner during the ongoing Ukraine crisis. Conducting drills with Russia and China at such a contentious time suggests that South Africa condones Russia's actions in Ukraine, even if its stated stance is one of non-alignment. South Africa's asserted neutral position is shared by fellow BRICS member India, which has also faced scrutiny for maintaining diplomatic, economic, and military relations with Russia following the invasion of Ukraine. And India has purchased Russian oil, participated in military exercises with Russia in August, and we should be circumspect about assigning greater meaning to the timing of message of these drills. So essentially, that is to say, Sarah Daly said everything. This person said everything, only to end with, oh, let's not make too big of a deal about it. But that was a pretty big deal, right? They're basically saying that South Africa is not non-aligned. South Africa is willing to work with Russia, and that's a big problem. So that's what they learned. That's what NATO learned. That's what the United States learned, because NATO is simply a puppet of the United States. And that's what the big concern is. All right. That's what the big concern is with South Africa, that it is but another country that is not following the U.S. line in Ukraine. It's not following the unipolar order. It's not following U.S. domination anymore. And BRICS is essentially now at war with the collective West, not because they want to be at war, but because the United States has declared it. All in all, they've declared it. Every time they accuse China and South Africa of supposedly supplying weapons to Russia, they're basically saying they're a party to the war despite no evidence of such a thing. but they're a direct party to the war, meaning they are in the war. They are a target in this war. They are our target. That's what I mean by declaring war on BRICS. Oftentimes, there's a lot of, when it comes to analyzing war and conflict, there's too much literal interpretations of what foreign policy establishment figures, war hawks, leaders do, and what they say, rather than what they do. But even when there is analysis of both, oftentimes we're only looking at the surface level of what it all means. But given the timing, we can connect the timing of these accusations on South Africa of supplying Russia with weapons with its new leadership role, at least this year around in BRICS, as another example of how the US and the collective West is building up toward war against all the BRICS countries, right? And you even heard the NATO's Atlantic Council say, well, India is also a party to this. And if you've been reading the Financial Times, you know there have been several articles too that have been stating, you read the Financial Times, they've been saying, well, India is not all in our camp, so we can't necessarily trust them to just follow along. We should try to massage them always, and we should try to support them when they are anti-China. But just know that they're firmly cooperating with Russia, and that they're not necessarily going to get into a great bloc confrontation or a power confrontation with China either, if it doesn't work in their best interest. And so, with that level of distrust that the United States has in these so-called partners, remember, India is supposed to be a partner in the Quad. South Africa, even after apartheid was ended, and the U.S. made Nelson Mandela a terrorist and was a party to all the violence and just the racial degradation and everything that happened in South Africa. Despite all of that, the post-apartheid government in South Africa was relatively conciliatory with the United States and really built robust economic relations, often to the detriment of South Africa. But it's not enough, right? At this moment, none of that is enough. So South Africa deciding to pursue some strategic autonomy is a huge threat to the US's empire. It's a huge threat to the unipolar order. And so these accusations are going to continue to come. And so Cyril Ramaphosa's approach here may be challenging because U.S. intelligence services are not going to find anything. They're more likely to make up things to sabotage that government. And we will have to see how these accusations and perhaps the threats that are being made behind the scenes, how they affect South Africa's behavior moving forward in this BRICS, this whirlwind BRICS summit that's coming up in the summertime. We'll have to see how it affects things, because you already saw from Miss Pandor, the foreign minister of South Africa, we've already seen her kind of hedging, right? Saying, well, we want de-dollarization, we want to pursue it, but we're not going to isolate ourselves from the US either. And that's a big contradiction that the BRICS are going to have to work out when it comes to this independent and new common currency, is how much do they want to poke the US bear? And this bear is a grizzly bear that is very wounded right now in looking to kill. So how much is India and South Africa in particular, and even Brazil, how much are they willing to rock the boat, given that Russia and China enjoy a relative stability in a position, both economically and militarily, that protects itself from some of the harsher consequences of things like sanctions and military, diplomatic, intelligence sabotage? Brazil and South Africa and even India do not enjoy such protection or comfort. So we'll have to see how South Africa deals with this, because South Africa is in a position where it is being tasked with a leadership position. And that's great, because it means that the biggest, one of the biggest economies, if not the biggest economy on the African continent, is down with the multipolar order. It is on the multipolar train, and it is. And South Africa has been very much a party, a very independent and strategic party in this phenomenon. That's why many countries are going to South Africa and saying, hey, we want to join BRICS. It's because there is a huge buy-in there. But this declared war on BRICS will not be happening with bombs and airstrikes and those kind of things like traditional wars are generally thought of. It's going to happen behind the scenes. It's going to happen with the U.S. trying to assert whatever is left of its unipolar domination to relay threats, to intimidate, to essentially sabotage any efforts from South Africa to grow and develop its position within this BRICS alliance. And that's where the war on BRICS is. De-dollarization is happening, and the fact that BRICS is even talking about a new common currency is a huge development, and one that shows how much de-dollarization has sped up during this Ukraine moment in this Ukraine proxy war. But we also have to understand that this Ukraine proxy war, that this situation, this growing threat toward World War III, also includes the US and all of its vassals, which are willing to burn the world to the ground to protect and maintain this US domination, this US foreign policy establishment dominance, this neocon hawkish, completely and utterly servile establishment that is working on behest of the most vile and gruesome profiteers and elites that this planet has to offer. That's what's at stake here, is the power of these tiny few individuals. It's what's at stake, these monopolies and these banks and these military contractors. All of them are looking at BRICS saying, we are going to be history if they are successful. We will no longer exist because we will not be needed anymore. That is what is at stake here. And that is why BRICS is essentially being declared an enemy of the United States and the collective West. It's why Annalena Baerbock, after this is all during this, it's already happened. Germany a little slow to the punch here because, you know, they have a lot of practice in being silent and complicit on U.S. war crimes, even against them, a la Nord Stream. Annalena Baerbock on cue. Oh, we're concerned too about South Africa sending one, but this is after the apology. This is after now they're trying to scramble and put it under wraps so we don't hear about it or talk about it because, you know, this is something they need to use over and over again to build support for war against BRICS. They don't want to exhaust this option. They damn near have exhausted every other. So Annalena Baerbock, a little slow to the punch, still talking about South Africa arming Russia without any evidence. And of course, that doesn't really matter because the war on BRICS is very important. It's existential in the sense that the US dollar is at stake, US and Western domination is at stake, and China and Russia, Brazil, India, South Africa. It's one block that has emerged out of a growing trend amongst the global majority, led by China, led by Russia, which are seeking a way out and building and developing. Honestly, I say seeking, and I think that's a very modest thing. They are building a way out of U.S. economic and military domination. That's what they're doing, and it's working. It really is. Russia has proved itself to be almost virtually, not entirely, sanctions proof. I mean, it's not as if sanctions have been of benefit directly, but Russia has restructured so that it can maintain economic growth and stability. China is virtually sanctions proof and maintains economic growth and stability to even a greater degree, despite U.S. economic terrorism and the constant provocations militarily that the U.S. is throwing at it. And now you have Brazil, India, and South Africa, these major developing, emerging economies. They are also building up themselves to be truly sovereign. But it will take political will. And the United States understands that war is not just about bloodshed, and the collective West understands this. The neocons understand this. It's not just about bloodshed. It's about politics. And so they're trying here to send a message to South Africa. And honestly, they've been sending this message to the rest of the Brics countries, to Brazil, to India, but also the rest of the global South, that if you do business with Russia, if you do business with China to a degree that is uncomfortable for us, then we are going to make you pay. And that's what sanctions have been about all over the world, right? That's what these proxy wars in Syria and Iran, on and on and on, all across the world, all of these military, covert, overt, regardless, all of these military operations, especially since the declaration of great power competition under the Trump administration, but even before this, the pivot to Asia, military encirclement of Russia during the Obama years, since the war on terror has become essentially history, and it's been history for many years now. Let's be honest here. It's been history since the Obama era. It's been something that they've kept in their back pocket and continued many ways policy-wise, but strategically, it's just not where it's at. Ever since then, the target of all military interventions, of all of the U.S.'s warmongering, has been at Russia and China. And now that Russia and China are leaders in mechanisms like Brics, well, the stakes are even higher. And Brics, right? 10 years ago, we were talking about Brics as some minor player on the world stage. No more. They're talking about common currencies. They're talking about expanding 19 more countries. And they're talking about daily requests. So we're talking about a development that's rapidly progressing. Multipolarity is winning, and the U.S. is desperate to stop it. So that's why they're waging war. And South Africa has been caught up in this war against Brics. And so we're going to have to see what happens during this August summit to see if it has any effect. I'm going to say that the momentum is going to continue anyway, but we'll have to see. So that's it for the content, everyone. That's it for the news stories. I've been going for 2 hours talking about content. I don't know how long these segments are. I guess I took little breaks in between. Still got 1,000 viewers here. Thanks so much for hanging out with me on a Saturday. We have more than 1,000 likes, so we're all good there. But of course, if you haven't liked the stream, keep liking the stream. So now what I'm going to do, all right, I got to charge my computer. I'm going to need a sound check from you because sometimes that causes problems, all right? I also want to go over super chats. And but before I do that, before you guys, if you guys want to go because the content is over, be sure to like the stream, subscribe to the channel, hit that notifications bell, and I have some announcements I'm going to get to, so don't leave necessarily just yet if you want to stay and hang out, but please do subscribe on Patreon, patreon.com/Dhaiphong, and that will help me upgrade technology because my computer that I use, I'm using a laptop. It literally dies so quickly doing these streams because it's just being overworked and there's so many other issues. So I need a new computer. That's why I'm doing a tech drive. So Patreon, you can do annual memberships, Substack, annual memberships, and you can also join as a YouTube member. I see some YouTube members in the chat. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Of course, thank you to all the moderators too. You can gift memberships as Joe, the moderator here on the stream. I want you to do that if that works for you. Gifting memberships is a very nice way of supporting the channel and also joining as a member as well. And there's one-time options in the link tree in the description. So with all that said, if you all, if those of you who don't want to stick around for the hangout sesh, which will be about 15 more minutes, that's what I wanted to announce. I got the Duran as my next guest coming up Friday the 19th. I might stream once or twice. Not twice. Once before that, probably.